Welcome back, KOAP European students, European history students. This is part two of the price revolution and the commercialization of Europe. So let's recap what we learned so far in the first episode about the price revolution. For the first time, all levels of European society and the hierarchy in European society had enough money to purchase essentials. And this caused prices to rise dramatically. As more sales happened, that equaled a higher demand, and that equaled higher prices. As a result, the products and the prices of products in Europe skyrocket. As a result, also, production in Europe skyrockets, and the demands for goods increased further, particularly for food. And for the first time in world history, people were able to afford food consistently, and the strained European ability to provide food, which forced them to depend on the Americas, and new concepts of farming, such as closing off the common lands to mass-produce food, were results of this. Also, that food coming in from the New World, we need to make sure that we understand that that was part of the Columbian Exchange. So that's a review of the significance of the price revolution. And then we also introduced the enclosure movement and a topic of commercialization. So while peasants had depended on common land for sustenance and protection during the feudal times, nobles and non-noble landowners began to fence off their lands and enclose them. And that sent some peasants packing for the cities. This allowed them to keep the animals out and utilize a greater portion of the land for agriculture, not for sustenance, but for profit, which is known as commercialization. This trend picks up, especially in England and in the Netherlands, as bankers, merchants, and landowners accumulate greater and greater wealth, and more people focus on commercializing agriculture and this agricultural revolution and other goods for profit rather than for personal use. Again, because the increased money supply from exploration in the price revolution had increased the amount of money people had, as well as it increased the size of Western European countries and their economies. So this drastic rise in the money supply, as well as new systems of bankings that we're going to introduce to you here, and new system of banking and loans, allowed for more investment opportunities, and again, mainly for the Netherlands and England. So it's important to note, while Spain and Portugal were the first to benefit, the 17th century saw the gradual loss of most of Portugal and Spanish holdings and power to the navies and charter companies of the England and Netherlands. So again, some of you asked about this in class, like what happened to Portugal? Well, again, they do maintain foothold in various parts of Asia, but for the most part, by the 17th century, we're going to see them lose most of their colonial possessions. And as we know, Spain is in a perpetual state of decline that'll culminate in American history with the Spanish-American War in 1898, where you'll see Spain basically lose the Philippines and lose out on Cuba and basically be a third-rate power. The fact that people were enabled to have a little bit more money, and we talked about some new banking traits, as well as new ways to give people loans and things like that. We see investment opportunities rise for not just the extremely wealthy, but also in some cases the merchant class and the lower middle class. So what this does is it expands something called joint stock investments. So in other words, as people have a little bit more money in their pocket, again, surplus money, they are able to invest in different ventures, invest in exploration, as well as starting new companies, be part owners. Just like today, if you own stock, you're technically part owner of a company. So again, what exactly were joint stock companies? Again, people with surplus money began to invest and buy stocks in certain companies and receive dividends on their investment, while a board of directors ran the company and made the important business decisions for that company. Why is this significant? Because we're going to see England and the Netherlands are able to pool more money than traditional powers, such as in France and mainly in Spain. They're able to pool more money from a more diverse group of people and actually bring more companies and bring more business ventures to their country, and that's going to really be favorable to their style of mercantilism. Now, you probably remember learning about these types of companies maybe back in 8th grade when you were taking U.S. history, or maybe even world history in 9th grade. But nonetheless, these companies are known as charter companies. Two examples, great examples of successful charter companies, are the British East India Company and the Dutch East Indies Company. Now, the British East India Company was Britain's company in charge of trade with India, and they were able to receive from the Mughal court in India the authority to collect taxes from lands in the surrounding areas of Calcutta in India. And what this does is it sets the stage for Britain colonizing India into the 1800s. Sir Robert Clive, an aggressive British empire builder, eventually became the chief representative of the East India Company. We'll talk more about him a little bit later in the year. And he consolidated British control in Bengal. And in this also, British East India Company, for American history, you probably remember that in 1773, the British East India Company was overstocked with 17 million pounds of unsold tea from the Far East. And if the company collapsed, the London government would lose a ton of money. So therefore, the London government gave this company a full monopoly of the tea to sell in America. And a lot of American colonists, in the height of the events leading up to the American Revolution, feared that this was a trick yet for them to pay more taxes to the British government. They decided to get together, dress up as Native Americans, and throw the tea into the harbor. And yes, I'm talking about the Boston Tea Party. There was also the British Massachusetts Bay Company, which was a joint stock company chartered, having trouble talking right now, by Charles I in 1629. It was basically controlled by non-separatists who took the charter with them to New England and in effect converted it to a written constitution for the colony. So when we talk about Plymouth and we talk about the Massachusetts Bay Colony in U.S. history, it was first founded by the Massachusetts Bay Company. So these were the order of the day, these charter companies. Now the Dutch had the Dutch East Indies Company. It was a joint stock company chartered by the States General in the Netherlands to expand trade and to promote relations between the Dutch government and its colonial ventures, especially in these colonial ventures which were dealing spices and making tons of money. It established a colony at the Cape of Good Hope in 1652, and by the 1630s it was paying a return of 35% on the investment. So a lot of people, no matter how much you were investing, were making a really, really nice profit, which facilitated the economies of, again, both the Netherlands and as well as England. Now there was also the Dutch West India Company, and this Dutch investment company was founded in 1621 and had outposts in North America, in Africa, and the sugar industry in Brazil. Again, in the end, charter companies had certain goals. But we need to know these. Charters signed by the companies to start colonies and establish new settlements, these were the sole purpose of basically raising money for the mother country. And eventually, if these charter companies were establishing new settlements that were successful, these would later be turned into colonies taken over by the mother country. The goal of these charter companies was also to control all trade in region, by force if necessary, with their private mercenary armies, and to help the mother country's armed forces if necessary. These charter companies also functioned as colonial governments in these particular areas, in these settlements, until the mother countries officially took over and set up an official colony. But nonetheless, this is all part of mercantilism. It was all about bringing back goods and raw materials and essentially profits for the sole purpose of enriching the mother country. And here's kind of a cartoon that basically epitomizes mercantilism and the argument for colonial expansion. There's the mother country at the table, and the colonies are there to bring gold and silver, foodstuffs, and raw materials as part of the Columbian Exchange to make the mother country wealthy. Now, while much of Western Europe, as we've said, was commercializing, exploring, and profiting during the 16th century, the people of Europe, you need to understand, were still mostly in the 16th century peasants. While many of these people were making their ways to the cities because of the enclosure movements, peasant agriculture was, during the 16th century, still the dominant economic form. Gradually, commercialization progresses, and Europe will undergo an agricultural revolution, mass-producing food And that will eventually happen. But for this time period in history, by the 16th and 17th centuries, we need to understand that peasant agriculture is still the norm. It won't be until really the 18th century, with the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, that Europe will see more and more people move in droves to the cities in basically the introduction of the Industrial Revolution, which is yet another drastic shift in the European economy. In Eastern Europe, this is really important to note, and I've made mention of this before, almost zero commercialization occurs. Thus, industrialization, as it progresses through the 18th and 19th century, will also really lag behind here and not really happen like it does in the West. It won't happen really until after Napoleon, and even that, it was very, very slow. So places like Poland, Hungary, and Russia will all remain largely an agricultural-based society and economy tied to serfdom. And as a result, Eastern Europe, the land-based nobles, will hold the majority of the power, as we've talked about with Poland and the Shem and the Liberum Veto. And this will, again, prevent Eastern Europe from growing economically, agriculturally, and industrially. So these are the trends of the price revolution, the enclosure movement, and the commercialization of Europe. If you have any questions, please write them down and be ready to go in class the next time we meet. Thanks for tuning in. Good day.